Hello there. Thank you for joining us. The financial earthquake we've all been living through this month continues to trigger aftershocks. Today, the two top officials in charge of Canada's economy cautioned that hope of a recovery is in the distant future. In the more immediate term, expect slow or no growth and more joblessness. But as Ottawa Bureau Chief Jacques Bourbeau reports, some think even that outlook is too rosy.
This job fair in Toronto may be an early warning sign of what's in store for Canada's economy. Only a few companies showed up offering positions, but at each booth, long lineups of job seekers.
It's really tough. The job market's crazy right now.
They're also willing to take anything at this point. We have a lot of temporary contract roles, and people are, taking anything at this point.
The economic bad news keeps piling up. The credit crunch, plunging stock markets, falling retail sales. But in Ottawa, Canada's central banker is insisting the glass is half full.
The sky is not falling. The sky is still there. The sun is still coming up every day.
In fact, the Bank of Canada is refusing to use the R word, recession, predicting Canada's economy will continue to grow ever so slightly by 0.6% this year and next.
We are describing the situation in Canada as sluggish, as opposed to, in starker terms.
Those starker terms are being said south of the border. Today, General Motors announced pay cuts for its salaried employees, and in Washington, the former Federal Reserve Chairman made this prediction.
Given the financial damage to date, I cannot see how we can avoid a significant rise in layoffs and unemployment.
Business professor Ian Lee has been watching the U.S. economy slip, so when he looks at today's Bank of Canada projections, he's not so sure we can avoid a recession.
How on earth can we sail by as the United States is going into this very deep, dark, long recession? How can we just skate by as if we're not even connected to them? Because we are connected to them.
What's certain is Canada's economy is slowing, making it more difficult for Ottawa to balance its budget. But will we go into deficit? It's a question the finance minister is avoiding.
We're monitoring the situation closely. We will have to gauge where we are as we go forward.
But the people at this employment fair know exactly where they are, looking for a job at the worst possible time. Jacques Bourbeau, Global News, Ottawa.
Well, through this crisis, Canada's banks have found themselves at a competitive disadvantage for precious credit because, unlike major banks in the U.S. and Europe, governments haven't needed to rescue them by guaranteeing their loans. But today, our finance minister followed suit. CanMus News national correspondent David Akin is here to help explain this. David, help me understand this. Are Canadian taxpayers now buying banks too?
No, and that's an important point, Kevin. In other countries like the U.S., banks are in real trouble. So much so, the governments there are actually buying ownership stakes in banks. Here, our banks are fine. But where they do have a problem is getting credit at good terms in international markets. All their international competitors are borrowing at really good rates because their governments are essentially co-signing the loans. So all Flaherty did today was to say, look, if a Canadian bank needs it, we'll co-sign their loans too. Taxpayers are at risk only if one of our banks goes under, and that's not going to happen. The guarantee should help Canadian banks get new funds at cheap rates that they in turn lend to Canadian consumers and businesses.
So hopefully they'll pass that on to us and that'll benefit us. Now we have all these new economic forecasts today, and I know you've been crunching the numbers. How bad could Ottawa's finances get?
Well, it could get pretty ugly. Consider this. In Budget 2008, Jim Flaherty promised that next year he'd bring in $12.2 billion worth of new tax cuts, new spending, and debt reduction. But here's the problem. Our sluggish economy means less taxes for Ottawa. In fact, it will mean $16 billion less than what Flaherty once thought he'd have to spend. The TD Bank says that because of that, Ottawa could post a deficit next year of more than $10 billion. And yet, most economists are telling Ottawa, don't sweat it. A shallow deficit during bad times is okay. You can make it up when the good times roll around. But economists aren't politicians. And during the election campaign, every political party, including the Conservatives, vowed not to go into deficit. So if Flaherty wants to keep his word, he's going to have to cut billions in spending or raise taxes. And those very same economists, though, warn that cutting spending or raising taxes will actually worsen our economic problems. Flaherty will give us a hint of which way he's leaning in next month's economic and fiscal update. Kevin?
Sounds like he's in a pretty tight situation, though, David. Thank you. So once again, the markets responded to all of this with wild swings, up by 200, down by 300, and by the end of the day, the dollar closed down a little. The TSX rose nearly 95 points. The Dow in New York ended 172 points higher. Well, with so many numbers and predictions, there's one true test of the health of our economy: how much you're spending since the meltdown started. Well, we don't have those hard numbers yet, but people vote with their feet long before agencies count cash receipts. And as Annika Bauer reports, there's at least one kind of trip you've stopped making.
Expert 8 Gold king size already?
Less than a kilometre from the Canada-U.S. border, the Campbell River store is a well-known pit stop for both Canadians and Americans. But these days, traffic isn't what it used to be.
What we have noticed is less Canadians probably heading south on the weekends.
Shopping south of the border just isn't the deal it was even a few months ago. Ask Mike, who recently took possession of his newly purchased car from Washington State.
Just by waiting and hoping that the dollar would actually go above the U.S. dollar, I took a hit, I guess, of $600.
If a border lineup is any indication of how our dollar is doing, then judging from the trickle of traffic here today, our declining dollar has Canadians nervous about spending their hard-earned money south of the border.
We've seen a huge drop just in the last couple of days, and we are 20% below where we were last holiday season. So as we come into the Christmas season, when we normally see a lot of Canadians coming over to shop, we're not seeing that at this time, and it is going to concern us.
No chance of going on holidays because there's just no income for it. And with being in the construction industry, things are starting to slow down, so we need work, and the dollar needs to get better for more work.
The question everyone wants to know: where will the Canadian dollar bottom out?
At 78 or 79 cents, to me, that looks like we're about at the bottom. No guarantees, but I would say around the 78-cent level, which we almost touched yesterday. I think that's probably going to be somewhere around the bottom.
And according to this analyst, part of the remedy against our falling dollar lies in Canadians opening their wallets and spending what they can. Annika Bauer, Global News, Vancouver.